Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our 4th episode of the Tank Workshop Diaries. Thank you again for your positive feedback and the comments and the questions you've had. We are in one of our vehicle sheds with vehicles all around me. As you can see, a lot of the vehicles we use regularly for tanks in action, the Chieftain, the Leopard behind me here. That's a project for the future, a warrior project. And the T-34, that's again, has been parked up till we have time to actually work on it properly. A lot of these vehicles will also be going out for Tank Fest. It's only 4 weeks to go for Tank Fest. And the guys in the workshop are flat out at the moment preparing for all these vehicles. We have just under 50 vehicles out for Tank Fest. As an update on the last episode, we're working hard on the Churchill Mark III, one of the key vehicles we're trying to get ready for Tank Fest. The engine has now been placed back in the hull and all plumbed up, so that's ready to go. Bob made a specialist tool to test our hydraulic systems. A lot of the systems are hydraulically operated on the Churchill, so he'll tell more about that. And last time as well, they showed you how they made a tool to disassemble one of the suspension units. And let's start with that side of it to see how that tool is being used.
I think they both do the same thing.
We've got this steel back from the laser cutters, and as you can see, although the profile of the tool actually runs down here, we've had an extra bit added on the bottom. The purpose of that is so that we can put it between centres on the lathe and then turn it into round and put the thread on. Later we'll cut this bit off and then it'll match the profile on the engineering drawings. We've also made the pins that go in the bottom, and if you remember, they'll go into the plate at the bottom of the spring in order that we can compress it. There'll obviously be 2 of these. At the top then, we have the thick piece of steel that goes across the top of the suspension unit, and both of these threaded bars go through the holes. And then we have a couple of slip washers, and finally a bolt. And by screwing down on these bolts on either side of the plate, we'll then compress the spring and be able to remove the plate from underneath.
We need to twist the right way. So that wood needs to get out of the way. It's going to fall on your foot.
Wonderful, look at that. From drawing to manufacture to use. First time it's been done in 70 years.
Hold it in, see if it'll come out. This is 3 parts, first part, second part. That's all. Yeah, it must have. It must have gone better. It's not quite in. That should be in there. Yep.
Okay.
Should be able to form them off.
There we are. Yeah. Right.
Excellent.
Yes, a bit more weighty.
Look at that, how easy that one is.
Right, ready?
Fingers.
We also had to do an awful lot of work on this TA wheel. The bearings were completely shot, the seals were gone, it hadn't had much oil in a while, so it had to be stripped and completely rebuilt. Now just to highlight the best practice and why we do that, if I roll the one on the left hand side that's now been completely serviced and the one on the right, you'll see that the one on the right that still needs work doing to it comes to a halt a lot quicker, and this one's spinning nice and freely. That's due to old oil, bearings that need cleaning, seals, and often you can strip these apart and put them back together again and they'll perform much better. But it just sort of highlights really why they need to work on the suspension, because this is down to resistance. The more resistance you create and multiply it through all of the running gear means the engine's got to work harder in order to overcome it. And if it does that, then it increases wear on the engine and reduces its life. So it's always a good idea when you can to service all of your suspension. Having completed all of the engine testing on the stand, the next stage is to put the engine in the tank itself. And you can see now the engine's in position and it's all been plumbed in and connected up. Because of a lot of the controls that are controlled by the driver are hydraulic, we now need to know that when, for example, the driver presses down on the accelerator pedal, the engine actually accelerates at this end. And Bob's made a test rig in order for us to do this on the bench.
The Churchill has got quite a complicated hydraulic system for all its controls. So the brake, the throttle, the clutch and all the steering is operated by hydraulic cylinders. To make sure that these are functioning correctly before we put them into the vehicle, we've made up this simple test rig. That's the master cylinder. So what we'll do in turn, test each master cylinder for the separate systems together with its slave, which is the other end. The sweet corn tin is actually acting as a hydraulic reservoir at the moment for the fluid. And then I'm just operating by hand. In the vehicle, normally it'd be on a foot pedal or the steering tiller. This particular example here is part of the clutch setup. You've got the master cylinder there. This is part of the slave cylinder system. It's slightly complicated on a Churchill in that it's air servo assisted hydraulics. So you're actually using a hydraulic system to open a small piston in there, which then opens an air valve, lets air at 80 pounds per square inch through the valve in there, which then operates this air servo, which pushes on the clutch withdrawal system. In the vehicle, there's a compressor driven off the gearbox, which gives us 80 psi air pressure to operate all these subsidiary systems. We're running it off a ring main, hydraulic and air ring main, which we've set to 80 psi. I'll just put the connection on to there. So there's now air into the air side of the system. That's the hydraulic side. If I move back here now and operate the lever, what that has done, the hydraulic side has opened an air valve which has let the 80 psi air into the system. The servo's then advanced. If I simulate the withdrawal spring, I've now closed it up, and we'll repeat that. One of the problems we've got with this particular part of the system is that over a period of time, say about 15-20 minutes after we've initially bled the system on the rig, is that it's getting air migrating back into the hydraulic system and therefore stopping it functioning. So somewhere along the line there's a seal not operating correctly inside the system, I suspect. I've checked any external leaks, we don't seem to have any of those, so it's almost certainly going to be something in there. So I need to go on, inspect that, find out what's wrong with it, fix it, and then set it back up again, test it to my own satisfaction. What we normally do is then leave it overnight, something like that, and then if it's still functioning in the morning, we're reasonably happy that everything's okay. This is exactly the reason why we do this on a bench, because it's much simpler to do it here than inside the vehicle. Where, as I mentioned earlier, we had 16 feet of pipe in the way, plus the rest of the vehicle and an engine and everything else. So if we're happy with this, the only thing that can possibly be wrong in the vehicle is any malfunctioning in the pipework.
Just to orientate you, the engine's now in and in the front, as we've already explained. In between the engine and the gearbox that goes in this big space that we have here is the clutch and the cooling fan, which will bolt on the back of the flywheel of the engine. If you think back to the Matilda Diaries and the issues that we had with the gearbox, because it was so tight and there was so much going on, you can see here how much more room we've got with the 3 simple mounts. Note also that there is no coolant pipes going underneath it all of the pipe work is all nice and neat and going over the top. So they have kind of learnt some lessons from the Matilda. So compared to the Matilda then, you can see from the open space down here that it's a much simpler lift, and not only that, but actually once you've got it in, there's a lot more room to play with around the outside of the assembly.
We're here in one of our vehicle sheds where we keep a lot of the running vehicles for the season, and the Warrior we've added to our running list again, and a lot of the work was done by ALISDAIR, who'll be talking about it next, what he did to the vehicle. We had a fuel starvation problem. It turns out it was caused by an algae in the diesel, so it clogged up a lot of the diesel lines and the filters. So ALISDAIR will talk more about what he has done to clear all these lines to make the vehicle running again. We've used it during our tank selection display, and it will be used again during Tankfest later this month.
Hi, this is our Warrior Command vehicle. Sadly, we've got a bit of an issue with her. We've found there's a problem with our fuel system. This here is our fuel tank, and to the left of the fuel tank we have what's known as the collector tank. And what we've ascertained is the vehicle has actually been running on all the fuel that was remaining in the collector tank there. And as a result, the collector tank is obviously emptied, and we now have fuel starvation issues. So what we've got to do is basically every single pipe we have to try and clean out, get all this contaminant out of it. There's a lot of contaminant in there. Just looking on the end of the screwdriver there. But this is one of the fuel pumps here, and you can see how the contaminant has got into the pumps. We will be able to clean these, so you can see the veins of the pump, but you can see the build-up of the contaminant all through. So this is going to be a process of giving it a good clean, flushing it out. That will resolve the issue and should be up and running as soon as.
As well as our permanent staff, we also have workshop volunteers who 2 weekends a month come in order to work on projects such as this. This is Matilda 2, it was used as a gate guard, and it's now been donated to the museum so that we can transfer it into a desert vehicle for our new World War II display, which is opening next year. As well as tin work on the outside and working on the track adjusters, there's also bigger jobs such as repairing this broken towing eye. Not only are they working on the Matilda 2, but they're also working on the Dingo. This is an opportunity for the workshop staff, the permanent ones, and the workshop volunteers to work together. Our guys down the new workshop are building the gearbox and the main engine for this vehicle, whilst the volunteers do the paint job, which has been transferred the other way from a desert vehicle back to a Western European one.
On these pallets around me are suspension units off of one of our Challenger 1 main battle tanks. They've kindly been overhauled by Horseman Defence Systems, the original manufacturer of hydrogas units. We're actually in the process of waiting for another 6 units to be delivered, so we can then do the repair to our Challenger 1, which will be seen running at Tankfest this year. The actual overhaul we will see documented in a future episode of Workshop Diaries.
So here we are in one of the other vehicle sheds, NEF shed as we call it, on our Polish T-72. We had some fantastic support a few weeks back from our Belgian colleagues from the National Military Museum in Belgium, the War Heritage Institute as they're called now, because they have a lot of experience with T-tanks because I've been operating them for quite a few years, and I have a Polish gentleman, Franz, who has been coming over with Danny to help us with our T-72 and our Type 59. And some of the work we have done on the T-72 is we put new tracks on it last year, but it's jumping tracks at the moment on the sprockets. They swap the sprockets around because really you need to put new sprockets on it when you change track, but at the moment we do not have any spare set. So if any of you can help us with a set of T-72 rear sprockets, we would appreciate it because we need some new ones. So until that's resolved, the vehicle will not be used. We're using our Sandy T-72 for Tankfest instead. But they did also some great work inspecting the vehicle with us, that our technicians understand better what exactly it is that is important to look after. We changed quite a few of the filters. We did some engine tuning, and the engine runs better than it has ever done. So thanks again to our colleagues Danny and Franz in Belgium, who will be coming back to the Tank Museum for Tankfest in 4 weeks' time with their Sherman Firefly as a guest vehicle. But we've done this a lot more in recent years, working with other museums or with operators that have particular experience on a vehicle, because we find out it's the best way to teach our staff and volunteers how to operate a vehicle, how to maintain the vehicle. So it's a good partnership with other museums we have established over the last few years. So with literally 4 weeks to go for Tankfest, we are now in the busy period in the workshop, getting everything ready. We have just under 50 vehicles for Tankfest lined up this year. The vast majority are ready to go. We still have 2 vehicles on the display fleet side, the Chieftain ARV, the Armoured Recovery Vehicle, and the Type 59 tank still being worked on, and Alistair and Roy will talk in more detail about these 2 vehicles.
Well, here we are in the business end of a T59. This is another vehicle that we're trying to prepare ready for Tankfest, the up-and-coming Tankfest. We've had a plethora of problems with this vehicle. It came in initially for the bearings on the clutch and the contamination on the brake shoes. Where I'm actually stood is where the actual transfer box is. We had to take the transfer box out. It required a couple of gaskets to be replaced on that, which we've now completed. We had to remove the gearbox, which basically is where I'm stood now. With the gearbox out, what was exactly wrong with the clutch? We found out to be the output bearing on the main shaft, and also the bearing on the release bearing had gone. Fortunately, one of our suppliers has been able to come up with the bearings. Once that's been completed and the clutch has been rebuilt, we can then put the actual gearbox back in position. The transfer box, which sits in along this side of the vehicle here, and on top of the transfer box is actually the starter motor. So a fair bit of work to do, but we're confident that we'll be able to get it done ready for you all to see at Tankfest this year.
Another vehicle that's appearing at Tankfest would be the Chieftain ARV. We brought it in because we had some problems with the HTT ram, which is the hydraulic track tensioner. A weld at the back of it had cracked, which caused it to leak, which meant that we had to replace it with the new one that we've got now. All that's left to do now is to fit the stub axle, to refit the idler wheel, and then we can fit the track, and then we can take it on a road test to make sure it works as it should do.
Don't forget to leave your comments on the YouTube channel. We always read them, and please subscribe as well so you can follow us with all the future episodes, keeping you posted and updated on the project here at the Tank Museum. If you want to support us, please also join the patron scheme. It really goes directly to what we do here at the museum. So thanks again. Bye-bye.